Hello Aqua friends, today we are going to do a glowing sun through the trees landscape. I started off to create the glow by doing wet on wet. So I put a light wash of blue at the top. Lifting your paper helps to disperse the paint. I'm using ISO Yellow Deep and Yellow Ochre to lay down the yellow. And this is transparent pyrrole orange. I really like the way this paint glows. So wherever I'm seeing the yellow peeking through the reference photo, I'm adding that. I want the glow to transition to greens. So I am just doing the trees. As you can see, I have some areas that are very watery that I'm laying down, and I'm just kind of making hash marks, blobs, slight different marks. I am using and introducing some of the green. I'm using sap green. Just getting in the tree trunks. I'm just very softly touching and making these little hashtags sort of marks to represent the branches and the foliage. So you see how I alternate from some very, very watery, diluted color, and sometimes I'll use a spray bottle as well so that the colors bleed together. As you can see from the reference photo, that area is very brilliant. It has quite the glow. So that ISO yellow and the transparent pyrrole orange really brings this to life. Now obviously I sped this video up because if I did this real time it would be a 3-hour video. So, you know, you could always slow it down if you wanted to follow along, but just to let you know, those are, you know, just meandering lines that I'm creating. Towards the top of the trees, as I'm testing out my colors, I'll just go very lightly. Now I'm transitioning, and basically I'm using the oranges and greens together to do this transition, adding in some almost like a red color to the green to get this transition color. They are opposite on the color wheel, so you'll get this very muddy color that I'm getting now. Don't want to introduce too many different colors to the painting. You want to, you know, stick to the palette that you're using Otherwise, it's just not gonna look correct. So whatever I lay down on the trees, eventually I will be laying that same color combinations down on the ground as well when I do all the brush. So I make meandering lines when I want to soften things up a little bit. I use the spray bottle and spritz your paper lightly. And really it's a balance of hard and soft edges to create the illusion of all this foliage and depth. The trees towards the left-hand side of the painting do get awfully dark awfully quickly in this reference photo, so I'm trying to mimic that and build up things slowly. It's easier to put paint on than it is to take it off. Now, as far as the branches go, I am very, very lightly just touching the surface of the paper, just so lightly, and making all these little tiny branches. And notice I don't go for the whole line all at once. I sort of pick my pick my paintbrush up. I think this gives more realistic branches because you have all these lines that are connecting, almost like where the joints of the branches would go from one section to another. And it's easier to keep a light hand that way. I'm actually using a round 8 brush that has an extremely fine tip. These are the black silver brushes. I think Princeton makes these. So they hold a lot of water, and they, like I said, have such an extreme fine point to them that you could use it like a detail brush as well. Very, very versatile. So laying down, I didn't like the color I was getting. I'm trying to get the shadow, so I took some of that color off. Getting texture on the road by splattering. So I'm trying to block in colors as I go along. The right side of the painting has a lot of yellow in it, so I'm sort of just trying to build that up slowly. Working on this hillside now. And as you see, I'm just making all these very light hashtaggy type of marks where there's shadows. And where the foliage gets darker, I'm bringing in the darker colors. I'm varying the amount of water I use. Okay, bringing in the same greens that are in the trees. This is sap green. The other colors I've also used are burnt sienna, sepia, burnt umber, and to get a very dark green, like I said, I'm mixing kind of like green and red. They're opposite on the color wheel, like that vibrant orange, burnt sienna, mixing all that together to get like this kind of muddy mid-tone. So I am jumping around from different areas, as you can see. While one section is drying, I'm working on another. The two foreground trees I will leave to the last. Going over to that left-hand side, working on that hillside. So sometimes I just take a wet paintbrush and make lines and then come back in with color, as you can see how I did that here. Okay, and it's nice to let colors blend on the paper. I'm doing that a lot with these browns and greens. Just kind of laying the color down and they let them mingle together. So I'm building up color slowly. Spritzing again. Now I'm going back to working on the trees. Adding some more of that orange, that really brilliant orange. I felt like it still needed to be brighter. Needed that pop of color. This transparent pyrrole orange is one of my favorite colors. I love to paint with these bright jewel tone colors, the oranges. Even though this isn't really an autumn painting, it kind of looks like it from the way the sun is shining on these trees and making them appear this color. Adding the orange to the other side. letting those trees dry and going back to the hillside again. Building up the colors on the left side is important. That's where it's really dark in the reference photo. Yeah, I'm taking the sap green, but also a little bit of hooker's green, because hooker's green has that jewel tone green, if you will. So trying to lay down this very muddy color for the shadows that are going across the road. Dry brushing, adding in the tire marks, just adding a lot of texture. I'm going to splatter some more paint with a fan brush. Now the trees are dry. I felt like I needed them to have a little bit more height on that side, and they definitely, need to be also darker on that left side. So building up more trees. Very soft hashtaggy marks. Some areas thinner, some areas thicker. All right, the two trees in the foreground, laying down those colors. I mixed like the reds and greens together to get this blackish color, grayish color. I think I might have also used a little bit of neutral tint. Which is like a gray color. Depending on how thick you lay down neutral tint, it could look almost black. So notice I am painting around the foliage to make it look like that those branches are in front of that tree. It gives it some depth. Now the tedious job of putting in branches again on that side, just working and making all these little tiny, that's all I'm doing. Little lines, coming in with more blobby paint, making it thicker in some areas. You could go a little crazy and go real dense and add, a ton of branches. There are actually a lot more branches in the reference photo than I actually drew in, but I didn't want to take 8 hours doing this painting, so I am not that obsessive compulsive detail oriented, although I do love to paint realistically. I'm a tight painter. Loosey-goosey is not me. So I'm spritzing again with some water to get some of the foliage a softer effect, and just to make it have the illusion of like thicker leaves. Obviously if it's wet it's going to spread, so I'm getting more pigment on the paper. going back to working on the road and the hillside. I'm always trying to find ways of doing texture, so I'm like switching, as you can see, my brushes often. I have a tiny fan brush, I have a scrub type of brush that I'm using right there. I will use an X-Acto knife, a script liner brush, anything that's going to add some interest. I'm using a toothbrush there in order to get those rays through the trees. I have to lift that paint off because it's a little too, it's not very realistic. I need to get some of that brightness down and just lift off that. But I want the illusion that it's going through the branches, like the rays are going through there. Building up my oranges again. Now here's where I decided that the whole thing just wasn't dark enough and that I needed to do another layer and add a lot more dark trees and shadows in the landscape here. You're just using the very tip of my brush and a very, very milky consistency paint to make all these little marks. Constantly switching from a fan brush to script liners to round brushes. I use an X-Acto knife to try to scrape in lighter grass blades and such. So now that I've made the landscape darker, I am going to have to go back over those trees, those two main trees, and make those darker. So I wet the trees first, and then I'm going back over them with a very dark, almost black color, so I could get them to really pop out And I'll also have to go back over all the foliage and darken that as well. I feel like the glow is not dramatic enough if the surrounding trees aren't darker. So that is why I added this extra layer here and went over all those intricate tree branches. So kind of just going over the same areas. Not exactly the same, I'm not trying to match it, I'm just trying to add to it and using the darker colors that I used on the tree trunks. This just also adds depth to the painting as well. Pronouncing the tree trunks of some of these trees a bit more. Some final touches, more dry brushing. I felt like the shadows on the road needed to be a little darker as well. And basically I just kept playing with it until I felt like it was done and everything had enough texture. Sign your painting and you're finished. Thanks for joining me today, guys. See you next week.